Welcome back to Mustache Moto. It's Ben, and today we're going to continue with our Motorcycle Simplified series. We're going to talk about braking, what you need to know to brake as effectively as possible and to keep you safe on the road. So there's a few things that are really integral to braking on a motorcycle. Somewhat different than in a car. Obviously, you got a lot more controls, different ways to do things. The big thing to think about is being smooth. Smoothness is key. Actually, in almost everything you do on a motorcycle, the smoother you are, the better you'll be. The faster you'll be, the less you'll upset the chassis of the bike, the more responsive the bike's going to be. So, got to be smooth. That means you don't grab a handful of brake, as people say. You squeeze the brake. You're progressive with the brakes. And let's explain why that's important. When you hit the brake on the bike, well, let's actually back up a little bit. The big thing on a motorcycle, or one of the most important things, is the transfer of weight as you accelerate and decelerate. You know this happens. You grab too much throttle, you can feel yourself get light, slide back in the saddle, lift the wheel even if you do too much. When you hit the brakes hard, you can feel yourself getting thrown forward on the bike. You can feel the weight increase on your hands. You can feel yourself get pushed forward. This is absolutely key. Why? Because your tires, the more weight that's on the tire, the more force pushing the tire into the pavement, the more traction you're going to have and the harder you can brake. Okay? We can see this really easy, real simple way to kind of understand this is if you stand and you have just almost no weight on your foot and you slide your foot back and forth on the pavement, it's going to slide really, really easily. Now, if you stand on one foot, so all of your weight is on that foot, you can't budge it. You can scoot back and forth and you're not going to be able to slide that because that extra force is pushing it down into the pavement. That's what happens on a motorcycle. And that's why you've got to be really progressive with the brakes. The harder you brake, the harder you can brake. So it kind of keeps going and getting more and more traction, lets you stop quicker and quicker and quicker. So that transfer, when you're coming forward, weight on the front tire, that means you can brake even harder. You can continuously brake harder. There's also a really, really key order to things. Now, this is something I learned back before linked braking, before I had ABS, none of that stuff, and I still do it today, and it actually will help you stop much faster. And the order of things is you start braking with your rear brake, okay? First thing is close throttle, start pushing the rear brake, and you progressively get harder on the rear brake. And as you do that, then you shift, that weight starts to shift forward, right? So you're shifting forward when you hit that brake. And then you start squeezing the front brake. And as you get more and more pressure on the front, you squeeze harder and harder on the front brake and you let off of the rear brake. Why? Because that rear wheel is getting unweighted. You're losing the traction on the rear wheel as the bike shifts forward, as the weight shifts forward on it. Let's look at how this works in a real scenario. This is me riding down the street. I've got 3 cameras on the bike. I've got one on my right brake foot. I got one on my right hand for my front brake, and then I've got one on my left hand for my clutch. So we're driving down the road. Comes time to brake, and you can see first, right above you can see I'm starting to close the throttle on the bike. At the same time, once that's closed, I've started putting my right foot onto the brake and started slowly applying pressure and starting to grab the front brake, also reaching for the clutch. Okay. Front brake or rear brake came down. The foot is actually applying pressure now. The weight's shifting forward. My clutch is fully in. I'll be downshifting along the way. You're not going to really hear that. And then I'm starting to apply front brake. You see me squeezing that in as the weight's shifting forward onto the bike. I'm going to continue progressively pulling that in tighter. And at the same time, if you see, my foot is coming up, so there's less and less pressure on the rear brake. So less brake on the back, more brake on the front as that weight transfers forward. And as you see, I release, foot was pretty much all the way up, and I release the front brake, and then I'll feed out the clutch, give it some power, and then I'm going into a turn. So that's at about a quarter speed. I'm going to play this back next. We'll play it at full speed, and you can see in real time what it looks like. Back it up. Okay, here we go, full speed. You can see it's almost happening simultaneously. I'm doing all three things: foot, front brake, rear brake, but it's smooth and it's in order. We'll do it one more time. Back it up. Here we go. Close foot, and off. So that gives you an idea of how it works in real time, and a little bit more of the pacing and the speed of it. You can do it even faster if it's an emergency stop, but you got to be smooth and you got to do it in that order. You know, the general thing you read is a motorcycle has 70% of the traction in the front tire when you're braking and 30% in the rear. That's a good kind of normal thing to say, you know, a good average. But really, you can have 100% of your braking in your front wheel. I mean, watch MotoGP, watch a racer who really knows what they're doing and is progressively applying that brake. They can go into a corner on the front wheel. I mean, rear wheel off the ground. If the wheel's off the ground, there ain't no traction going on. That's 100% braking in your front tire. Now, this order of things, you know, with using the rear brake the way I'm saying, and letting off as you're progressively squeezing harder and harder on the front brake and you're unweighting the rear wheel. This is something that if you've got linked brakes, if you've got ABS brakes, which most bikes have now, it's less important to take that pressure off the rear wheel. You'll still brake better and more smoothly if you do this, but if the rear wheel locks up, it's not catastrophic. You're not going to start sliding because the ABS is going to catch you. You won't stop quite as quickly, but you still get the benefit of the front brake. It's not a huge deal, but it's something worth practicing, especially if you ride a dirt bike or if you ride an older bike that doesn't have ABS. Sometimes I switch back and forth. I want to know how to do this, and I want this to be muscle memory. That's really key. If you do this every single time you brake, when you get into a panic emergency situation, you're going to do it without even thinking about it. And that's going to give you the bandwidth to scan and think and to figure out where you need to go and how you get out of the situation you're in while you're still threshold braking as hard as you can. Now, the other thing you need to do when you hit the brakes this hard is clutch. You need to pull the clutch in and just keep it in. You don't need to try and use engine braking if you're in an emergency situation. If you're kind of just slowing down a little bit, engine braking is awesome. But if you're really in a panic situation, just hold the clutch in, but keep downshifting because you want to be in the proper gear if you do have to accelerate and go, pull out or get around somebody. If you need to switch off of the gas, off of the brake and onto the gas quickly. So important to do. And like I said, do this every single time you brake. And if you do it every time you brake, when you have an emergency situation, you're not even going to think about it. It's muscle memory. You're going to do it, and you're going to actually stop so much quicker. All right, now get out there and ride.